bioluminescence. This is a popular topic. We had so many people sign up for the first version of this that Sam graciously consented to a second performance here. So welcome this evening. This is part of Friends of Fort Flagler's series of natural history presentations. These are a combination of virtual events like this one and events, hikes that are held in person in the park. And Daisy Bach will introduce in a couple of minutes our speaker for tonight. I want to say a couple of things. The first is Friends of Fort Flagler is very engaged this year. We have a lot of things going on. And right now it is our time of annual membership renewal and campaign for new members. So if you're not a member currently of the Friends of Fort Flagler and you use this park, like this park, support it, want to support it, for as little as $20 a year as a basic member, you can be a supporter of the Friends of Fort Flagler. One of the reasons that's important is that we've really honed our ability to do advocacy for the park, especially with our state legislators. And so having more members equals more legislative influence and heft in our advocacy efforts. So that's just one of the reasons to be a supporter. I also want to mention the fact that we're holding our annual membership meeting on April 23rd. That's a Sunday in the afternoon. And this year we're featuring a wonderful presentation by the Discovery Bay Wild Bird Rescue organization, and they will be there with a group of raptors, so owls, hawks, falcons, and I think an eagle even. And you'll be learning about these wonderful birds that they bring to these presentations. So that's reason enough to become a member. Join the membership meeting on the 23rd of April. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Daisy to introduce our program for this evening.
So good evening,
Thank you for being here.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for attending. I wanted to point something out. When Mark talked about advocacy, when we're competing for your tax dollars to go into different buckets, if we can show we have a greater membership, that's taken into consideration in deciding where funds are allocated. So as Mark said, if you love your park, if you want us to help get new roads in, get some of the buildings renovated, like our theater, our hospital fixed, your membership really does make a difference. One other thing I wanted to mention, so if you have any interest, what programs are coming up, just visit friendsoffortflagler.org and go under resources and you'll see events. So that'll be upcoming events. Starting this year, we are recording all of our events. So they're under the same heading, except it's under programs. So this will be recorded, or is being recorded, and will be posted. The other thing I wanted to remind you, in April, we have Earth Day weekend. And on April 22nd from 9 to 1, we're going to be doing scotch bloom removal. And on Sunday, the 23rd from 9 to 1, we're doing beach cleanup. So I believe we already published that information. We'd love to see you sign up. The more, the merrier for our park. And with that, I would like to introduce our speaker. So Sam Kaviar is our local kayak tour person at Fort Flagler. If you haven't been there, you see them as soon as you walk down by the beach on the left-hand side. And on a personal note, he's the guy that keeps an eye on Red Island for me. So I really appreciate him and his feedback to us. Sam has an interesting background. He's funny because he says, my first kayaking gig it was primarily for his biologist skills, but his first professional biology gig was because of his kayaking skills. So at Fort Flagler Olympic kayak tours, he's managed to marry both and take us out there and talk to us about the birds, the harbor seals, and of course, bioluminescence, which is why you're all here. And with that, Sam, you got it.
Thanks for the lovely introduction, Daisy and Mark. And I hope that maybe we'll let people be able to unmic themselves during the question period afterwards. Nice to meet you all. Thanks for coming. I'm going to set up the presentation. I'm actually currently working again in the park with a different hat at the USGS Fisheries Disease Ecology Research Center, which is a lot of fun as a winter job. As you all already heard, I'm Sam Kaviar, and I'm a sea kayak guide who owns and operates Olympic Kayak Tours in Flagler. And we kind of specialize on educating our guests about wildlife, about nature, about science, about conservation. And last year, we actually also introduced a fleet of unguided rental kayaks and stand-up paddleboards that we rent out on a schedule when the currents aren't too strong. So you could come on a tour, or you could also come on an unguided rental. Since 2017, we've successfully encountered biolume over 98% of the time. And since 2020, it's been 100% of our bioluminescence tours have encountered good biolume. And I came up with that method myself. Just a note on some of the lingo that gets used in the industry. So as a nickname, basically, bio versus loom, you know, for whatever reason, I feel strongly about this. I think loom, which is what I always just naturally called it, is a better nickname. Bio means life, and kind of when you're at the ocean, you know, you're always looking at living things, whether they're barnacles or whales, versus loom means light. And so that glowing light is really unique and special to the bioluminescent plankton. So tonight we're going to talk about 3 topics: the diversity of bioluminescence, the ecology of our local bioluminescent species, and the identity crisis we're having in bioluminescence science. And then we're going to have time, hopefully, for a more open question and answer period if people are interested. So bioluminescence, bio meaning living, and luminescence meaning light, so living things that make light. It's found all over the tree of life. It's cropped up a bunch of different places. So the most recent science shows that bioluminescence has evolved over 94 times, and it's found in a lot of different things, including bacteria, algae, protists, fish, insects like fireflies that kind of famously use bioluminescence as a form of sexual signaling, and fungi. Like right here in Washington State, we have honey mushrooms that actually bioluminesce in the equivalent of their roots. It's not found in plants or animals with a backbone on land. So bioluminescence, is a form of communication. And it's actually one of the most common and important forms of communication on planet Earth. And a lot of what is being said are lies, as we're about to get into. Recently, scientists have begun to deploy artificial bioluminescent lures in the deep sea, and they're learning a lot quickly that way. The speaker in the short clip we're going to listen to is a very cool woman named Eddie Witter, who is a pioneering deep sea biologist. So she's deployed a lure
that is elicited from animals in the deep sea. So The camera is black and white. It's not high resolution. And what you're seeing here is a bait box with a bunch of like the cockroaches of the ocean. There are isopods all over it. And right in the front is the electronic jellyfish. And when it starts flashing, it's just going to be one of the LEDs that's flashing very fast. But as soon as it starts to flash, and it's going to look big because it blooms on the camera, I want you to look right here. And there's something small there that responds. We're talking to something. It looks like a little string of pearls, basically. In fact, 3 strings of pearls. This was very consistent. This is in the Bahamas at about 2,000 feet. We basically have a chat room going on here because once it gets started, everybody's talking. And I think this is actually a shrimp that's releasing its bioluminescent chemicals into the water. But the cool thing is we're talking to it. We don't know what we're saying. Personally, I think it's something sexy.
So as you could see, the scientists were creating light and the animals were creating light back to them in response. I recently heard some scientists talk about how a lot of times with David Attenborough videos and the like, they kind of make space age sounds, space sounds as you hear the bioluminescence, and how because many creatures are actually excreting chemicals outside of their body, it might be more accurate to make fart sound effects as you're watching, which I thought was kind of a funny joke. So another important evolutionary function of bioluminescence is as a lure. So I muted this one because the audio is not so clear, but here we can see an anglerfish with the very famous characteristic lure. And so that basically is attracting a wide variety of animals to itself in the deep sea, which is generally dark. And so it can eat it with those big teeth we were just seeing. So another really cool and important function of bioluminescence in the sea is countershading. So more classical, so to speak, cases of countershading are like what you get with orcas or penguins, with many marine creatures where they have a lighter belly and a darker top. So you can imagine if you're looking down, that darker top will be harder to make out against the background, and that lighter belly will be harder to distinguish against the surface. So we're going to learn about some creatures that take it a bit further.
At night, these small sharks float above larger fish. Their undersides glow in the dark, almost perfectly matching the color of the ocean's surface. The cookie cutter shark's dog collar, however, does not glow. This silhouette appears to prey like a tiny fish. Just before the potential prey reaches this tiny fish, the cookie cutter shark uses its suction cup lips and top row of teeth to latch onto the attacker's body. Once attached, the cookie cutter shark uses its bottom teeth to scoop out a perfectly round hole from the prey's body, hence the name cookie cutter shark. This often doesn't kill the prey, but it does leave a pretty nasty scar. Cookie cutter sharks have been known to attack tuna, great white sharks, orcas, and even submarines. Lucky for humans, not many cookie cutter sharks have attacked people since they are nocturnal and live in deeper parts of the ocean. Even so, the cookie cutter shark is quite the force to be reckoned with.
So the burglar alarm idea is that sometimes bioluminescence is a type of SOS or distress signal. It happens when a creature is under attack or at least touched, and it's a signal to larger predators, hey, there's some life here, come eat it. In the deep sea especially, large meals are rare and hard to find in the dark, so they are very valuable. We believe this is why squids have such large, powerful eyes despite living in the darkness. So we're gonna get some examples of this.
And this is a burglar alarm. And that was a Humboldt squid, a juvenile Humboldt squid about 3 feet long. This is at 3,000 feet in Monterey Canyon. But if it's a burglar alarm, you wouldn't expect it to attack the jellyfish directly. It's supposed to be attacking what's attacking the jellyfish. But we did see a bunch of responses like this. This guy's a little more contemplative. Hey, wait a minute. There's supposed to be something else there. He's thinking about it, but he's persistent. He keeps coming back. And then he goes away for a few seconds to think about it some more and thinks, maybe if I come in from a different angle. Nope. What you're seeing,
I should actually say here as context that, you know, it was a goal for decades, if not centuries, to be able to see a giant squid alive. And that eluded us until very recently, as scientists have begun to deploy these artificial bioluminescent lures. And so this is some of the first live footage of a giant squid ever recorded, which has only happened in the last couple of years.
is the intensified camera's view under red light. And that's all Dr. Kubadera could see when the giant comes in here. And then he got so excited, he turned on his flashlight because he wanted to see better. And the giant didn't run away. So he risked turning on the white lights on the submersible, bringing a creature of legend from the misty history into high resolution video. It was absolutely breathtaking. And had this animal had its feeding tentacles intact and fully extended, it would have been as tall as a 2-story house. How could something that big live in our ocean and yet remain unfilmed until now? We've only explored about 5% of our ocean. There are great discoveries yet to be made.
So moving on to our second theme, we're going to talk about our local bioluminescent organisms. We're not going to get down to the exact species involved because of the identity crisis I alluded to in the introduction. We had some questions there. Oops, sorry. So we're going to be talking about our local bioluminescent organisms. Yes, but we know what general type of critters they are, so we'll talk about that. First, I just want to show what our local bioluminescence looks like. As you can see, these people are out at night and they are able to see it in their kayak with their paddle, with their hand, wherever they're touching and moving the water. Whereas in general, the overall water is dark. We'll talk about an exception to that later. One thing I will note is that when it's captured on video, it tends to, and film, it tends to show up as a bit more blue. And in my experience, when you see it in person, it tends to show up as a bit more green. So what's creating this phenomenon? They are single-celled organisms called dinoflagellates, and they are a protist. So protist is sort of the junk drawer kingdom of the tree of life. And that means they don't neatly fit into categories like plants or animal or bacteria. They do have a nucleus and specialized cell parts, though, called organelles. And they are generally very small, but some can be very, very large, up to 1.5 millimeters, which is huge for a single cell. So what do they eat? Some of them are photosynthetic, which means they get the energy they need to live off of the sun with chloroplasts. Others are what are called heterotrophic, hetero meaning other, so they're eating other things. And they especially like to eat the eggs of organisms that could grow up to eat them one day. We're going to take a look at what that looks like. So this is Noctiluca scintillans, nicknamed sea sparkle, which is the most famous bioluminescent dinoflagellate. And so that part that's moving on the screen there is called the tentacle. And so you can see it's pulling debris, whether those are very small plankton or kind of like the breakdown of living things in the water, what we call detritus, inside of its body. And as it gets pulled inside, they form a sac around the food called a vacuole and break it down. Noctilucas tend to live about 3 days, and it depends on how much food is available. And then they will split or divide asexually. They'll clone themselves. Though we do know in rare circumstances that we don't entirely understand, they can also have sexual reproduction. But you can see they pull quite a lot inside of themselves. So they're pretty cute, I think. Some dinoflagellates have these hard protective armor around them. This type does not. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Oh, and some are what are called mixotrophic. So they do a bit of eating from the sun and a bit of eating other organisms. So why do they bioluminesce? Let's hear it from David Attenborough.
Or some other animal that feeds on the dinoflagellates by filtering them out, comes along and starts to feed, it is, in doing so, illuminating itself. So that attracts the attention of perhaps bigger fish that might feed on the shrimp. Just as a flashing burglar alarm alerts the police to a thief, the dinoflagellates expose their attacker to its enemies. The shrimp is revealed to cuttlefish with fatal results.
So what we saw just now was a shrimp, which is a filter feeding creature that would be feeding on our dinoflagellates, on our plankton. And just like those we saw earlier playing out with the squid, basically, as it's moving and touching the bioluminescent plankton, it's causing them to glow. And that lets bigger predators know that this thing that's feeding on the plankton, on the bioluminescence, as you might call it, is there. And so then they'll come eat what's eating them. So it's like having a burglar alarm and getting the cops to come and stop the robber in your house. So how do they bioluminesce? We're going to break that down into 3 parts. So scintillans, pressure, and the chemical reaction. So scintillans are the part of the cell that creates the bioluminescent molecules. And so just like mitochondria in our bodies that have DNA, or chloroplasts in plants, these used to be their own free living bacteria, basically creatures, and then they got absorbed inside of a cell, and they still have their own DNA. And actually, we think, so these are called scintillans, that is the part that makes the dinoflagellate bioluminesce and makes it glow, that they have the same ancestor as chloroplasts. So this ancestor came into cells, billions of years ago, and some became chloroplasts that, allow things to live off the sun. And in dinoflagellates, some of them became this scintillon, which is what allows them to glow. So pressure is necessary for the bioluminescent reaction to happen. So basically, when there's pressure on the outside of these cells, it causes part of that scintillon I was just talking about to open up and allow the necessary chemicals to come together and react. And so that's why we see the bioluminescence when we touch the water, like through kayaking, but not usually from shore. There are exceptions to this of being able to see from shore. And generally what you need to be able to see the bioluminescence from shore is you need really strong wave action, causing enough pressure on these cells without something else touching them for this to happen. But the tricky thing is when that's just happening in the environment through like big waves, it's often kind of using up all the bioluminescence, which is kind of a limited resource. So to have that be really strong, you have to have strong waves and you have to have exceptionally strong bioluminescence to see it when you're not touching the water, if that makes sense. So we're going to just touch on the chemical reaction. And so what happens is oxygen and this enzyme called luciferase combine with the bioluminescent chemical, which is called luciferin. And that causes an excited electron that's at a higher state of activation to drop down a level. And when that happens, a flash of light is created. And that is the bioluminescence in the dinoflagellates. And surprisingly, scientists still don't entirely understand how the charged up chemical is fully created. So we're going to move on to our last topic, which is the identity crisis in bioluminescent science. So for many years, for decades, we thought we had this whole situation figured out. Those dinoflagellates we were looking at earlier, called Noctiluca scintillans, nicknamed sea sparkle, were thought to be the culprit. And we first learned about them in the 1700s, and even Benjamin Franklin talked about them. And at the time, they were called animalcules of living light, which is kind of cute. And they are the brightest bioluminescent dinoflagellate known, and they're super abundant here in the Salish Sea, in Washington's waters. And these are the ones that can get super big. And so we thought they made up most of the bioluminescence. And so if you were to read an article or go to most kayak tours, that's when you would see them. But 2019 came out and came along. Sorry, I'm reading some of the comments in the chat. And this paper by a group of scientists came out, and it showed that these noctilucas, which are found all over the world, they're found up into the polar regions, down into the tropics, and they don't glow along the lower 48 of the United States in what's called the California current. So from about where we are up here in Washington down to kind of the northern Baja Peninsula, which is super weird. Didn't know that from anywhere else in the world. So that means that we still don't know precisely which dinoflagellates are responsible for our bioluminescence. We actually have some other questions that this raises as well. So I was able to utilize the data collected by King County plankton surveys to look at the plankton we get and identify likely culprits. So of course, I don't know for sure. And while noctiluca do not create harmful toxins, most of the other dinoflagellates do that are in our area that bioluminesce. So this can create shellfish poisoning, PSP, because the shellfish filter the water and concentrate the dinoflagellates in their bodies. Whereas you wouldn't need to be scared of like touching the water. But yeah, so if you've ever seen those shellfish closures here on Marestone Island, it could actually be the bioluminescence involved. And some native groups were known to stop shellfish harvesting during periods of high loom. Climate change and nitrogen runoff from fertilizer or septic are known to contribute to these red tides and harmful algal blooms becoming worse. So bioluminescence is an active field of research with many questions remaining to be answered. And there are many, many aspects of bioluminescence and the way it impacts humans and the environment that I didn't have time to get into in tonight's presentation. Bioluminescent sea kayak tours are available to go out and experience it for yourself in person with my company. You can book at www.olympickayaktours.com. And even if you don't feel that you might be a good fit to come kayaking yourself, come sea kayaking, you know, telling your friends, telling your community, helping get the word out is really valuable. And one of the coolest things about bioluminescent kayaking is you can actually see animals illuminated in the water. So here we have a video of some dolphins swimming through bioluminescence.
Wow. I see it too.
I want to thank Friends of Fort Flagler and Daisy and Mark and these different scientists that I've corresponded with over the years as I've been learning about bioluminescence and have taken time to answer my questions. And King County Plankton Toes and the park and the Nisqually Reach Nature Center where I got my start. So I kept this version of the presentation a lot shorter than my last one, and I'd love to take your all's questions.
So Sam, someone asked about biofluorescence. Is that the same as bioluminescence?
Great question. So I had some slides on this originally, but I took them out to make things a little shorter. So biofluorescence is the so fluorescence yes, it is a form of fluorescence. So basically, fluorescence refers to the light flash being really short, and it's a term from chemistry, as opposed to phosphorescence. So a lot of times you'll hear folks, especially older folks, refer to the bioluminescence as phosphorescence. And technically, phosphorescence means something that's giving off the light for a long time and not just a flash. So if you were to see our bioluminescent jellyfish, which is another type of plankton, that would be an example of phosphorescence. But the flashing that we normally see as bioluminescence is fluorescence. And there's another, this is probably more than you wanted. There's another part of biofluorescence specifically, as opposed to just fluorescence. Obviously, it's a living thing, but it can also be when light hits a living thing and it bounces back as a different color, essentially. So it does a phase shift, if that makes sense. So that's part of what fluorescence means.
Okay. Why do they only occur in the summer? What does bioluminescence only occur in the summer?
You know, that's actually a misconception. It doesn't only occur in the summer. Basically, so it's a little complicated, but I'm going to explain it. So, but first of all, yeah. So I have found bioluminescence as early as April and through the end of October. The creatures that create it are present year round. And actually, if you had a period of high sun, you can get it really in the off season. And sorry, I'm reading. I'm going to stop reading the comments actually, because I'm distracting myself from what I'm saying. So anyway, in the summertime, so as we saw, most of these dinoflagellates are small predators. And when there's more sun in the summer, it causes the algae that they eat to increase, or like the plant algae. These things are called algae, but you know, they're eating other creatures. Anyway, so there's more food for them. And when they're well nourished, they have the energy to put it into the glow. It's actually a little more complicated than that, but maybe I'll just leave it there and take the next question.
So basically, if they gorge in the summer, they're gonna be brighter and they're more visible. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and it's possible that you remember how I mentioned that the scientific community doesn't entirely understand exactly how they produce the activated chemical that's used to make the flash. And also that these things are closely related to chloroplasts. It's possible that there could be some aspect of being charged directly by the sun, but that's not clearly understood. But what is understood is if they have enough to eat, they will produce more light.
Okay, awesome. Another question, and I'm not going to pronounce this correctly. The dinoflagellates live for 3 days and they divide. How long do they stay alive overall?
So that division is considered the end of their life. So like, you know, it divides in two, and then that's considered like the next generation. And you know, that's an average. It really can vary, mostly based on how much food they have. So sometimes it can take longer.
Okay.
But really short periods, days.
I can see we have another. I think that is it. Any other questions for Sam?
I'll give a couple tips, I don't really know exactly what people's frame of reference are with bioluminescence, if people have never seen it, or if you're familiar and you just wanted to understand the science a little bit better. But you do need to find as dark an area as possible to see bioluminescence. The darker, the better. So, if you're in a place you're getting a lot of light pollution facing King County potentially, it's going to be harder to see it, and you're only going to be able to see it when it's much stronger, versus if you're in a place that's really nice and dark, you're going to be able to see it better. And in a pinch, if you want to make things darker, you can go with friends and bring a tarp and spread it over your heads. And they actually do this on some tours down in the Caribbean to make things darker. And you really want to let your eyes adjust to the darkness. So your headlamp, not great for seeing the bioluminescence. And something you can do to kind of make your eyes adapt to the darkness more quickly is actually close your eyes for 10 seconds and then open them. And that'll help your eyes adjust to the darkness more rapidly.
Now, I have another question here. Is Puget Sound better than San Juan Island for the sightings?
They're big places, both the San Juan Archipelago and Puget Sound. So it really depends on where you're talking about within those places. And something that's a little bit confusing, I think, for people is it's not just a when thing or a where thing. It's a when and where thing. So it's not always going to be good, equally good on the same night everywhere. And also, sometimes it'll be better closer to after dark, which is when I plan my tours, versus if you wanted to stay up till 4 a.m, you might be able to catch it on some other nights. And a long time ago, I actually used to offer like pre-dawn tours that would go into dawn, and we would get bioluminescence, but it was too much. I cut that out. Yeah, so there are parts of the San Juans that are great. King County, anywhere near the cities is going to be tough. But if you get down into like Nisqually Delta, Shelton, or up here kind of on the Admiralty Inlet, where you have darker areas, you're going to have a better time.
Okay, another question. If a creature eats one of the bioluminescence, will the creature then glow?
So the short answer is no. There's some complicated science around this that I could get into where actually for many decades, I'll just talk about it really quick. For many decades, I was talking about how the part of the cell that makes the light is so closely related to chloroplasts. We thought that the only way that the non-photosynthetic dinoflagellates could produce their glow was from eating things that had chloroplasts in them. But what they have shown in experiments is that even dinoflagellates that haven't had access to that kind of food for a full year can still glow. So they're not only getting it from eating things with chloroplasts, they're able to produce it on their own. I don't know of any organisms that eat the dinoflagellates to glow, but that overall relationship is a good idea, is right. Like with those deep sea anglerfish we looked at earlier in the presentation, they are hosting organisms in their body that can glow, and they're like basically giving them sugars, and in return, those things are glowing for them.
Okay, another question. Does the phase of the moon make a difference?
It does, in the sense of how much light is around. There's a lot of misconceptions about that, though. People tend to think it's like the only. I can sometimes get excellent bioluminescence despite the moon being full. And that is something that I learned over time. But in general, the amount of light, more light makes it harder to see the bioluminescence.
Okay. What time do your tours go out in the summer?
Can you say that again?
What time do the tours go out in the summer?
It varies with the sunset. So they will start an hour before legal sunset and go out for 2 hours or 2.5 hours after sunset.
I
In the first hour, we're usually like getting everyone to the bathroom and learning about the boats and getting comfortable.
training.
Yeah, training.
It says, somebody says, I've seen seaweed on a low tide that have many colors that changes as it moves. What causes this?
That is an example of the biofluorescence. So basically, there's like, I had a video in here in my last rendition of this presentation, but the light hits the algae, the seaweed. Seaweeds are algae. Algae is kind of a confusing word. Anyway. And so have you guys ever seen what kind of looks like pollution, like an oil sheen in a stream or on the beach? Most of the time, that's actually not pollution. What that is what's called bio-oils. So if you remember where things like petroleum and such came from millions of years ago, it's from mostly algae under pressure, under the earth that like turned into oil. So these algae, these seaweeds produce oil, which is why, we've been actually able to fly airplanes on algae oil, which is like a carbon neutral way of flying airplanes. That's still like, prototype thing, but it's something we've done. So yeah, it's biofluorescence and it's a bio oil.
So I'm probably going to mispronounce this. Do nudibranchs luminesce?
Great question. I am the biggest nudibranch fan. I love nudibranchs. Really.
Okay, what is a
nudibranch? A nudibranch
Yeah.
is a sea slug, and so shellfish are two-footed clams, two-footed mollusks, and like a chitin or a limpet is a one-footed clam.
Okay.
And a nudibranch is also a one-footed clam, but it doesn't have a shell at all. And some of them are free floating in the water column, and other ones are primarily in contact with rocks and stuff, substrate. I actually got to see 3 types of nudibranchs last week, and also 3 different types of nudibranch egg masses right here around the island and around PT, which was really nice. I think they're really cool.
But do they luminesce?
So many of them fluoresce, which is what we're talking about, of like changing the light. I believe there's one species in like tropical Asian waters that absorbs bioluminescence from things that it eats and repurposes it in its body. But I don't know too much about that. I think it's like in Indonesia. I can't even say with 100% confidence that I'm right, but not here.
Okay. Somebody asked, where would be a good area in Marrowstone to see it, or around Marrowstone?
It's interesting because a lot of our public lands are closed after dark. So I can't really tell anyone specifically to break the rules. We have like a special arrangement with the park to do our tours, but Mystery Bay can be good. The interior of the harbor. I actually haven't spent a ton of time looking for shore-based bioluminescence on the exterior of the island, because unfortunately I don't live on the island. I'd love to, but I'm actually looking to buy a place. If anybody knows anything affordable, a fixer-upper, please get in contact. but I have commuted across Port Townsend Bay after dark, and there is bioluminescence out there. But in general, you kind of want, I'll give you a hint, you want nooks and crannies are good. Nooks and crannies and dark areas.
So I have a follow-up question on the moon. I think the question is, do the different phases of the moon affect luminescence, not from just the viewing, but more like from the feeding of it, or?
No,
is it
it's a misconception. Yeah, it's a misconception.
Okay.
Nope.
All right.
As far as I know,
So someone asked, can bioluminescence be seen from off the Pacific coast? I've actually seen it off the Pacific coast. I'm going to say yes, but I'm not the expert, Sam. You are.
Oh, definitely. Do they kind of mean like in near shore, like here on the peninsula, or they mean offshore?
They would just, it was a general Pacific coast.
Yeah. There's different types. I can't quite say that bioluminescence is found in all waters, because with corresponding with a number of scientists, I haven't gotten that impression, but it's pretty widespread. And a number of scientists I was talking to were surprised to learn that it's here. Like I was talking to this scientist in England, actually. There are parts of the Indian Ocean where there's this thing that can happen that nobody knows how to predict, called the Milky Seas phenomenon, where basically the bioluminescence gets so strong that it lights up like solid miles of ocean, and it's visible from space. But yeah, you can see it off the coast. Yeah.
So an interesting question. They said, obviously, bioluminescence over there, always in the water, we just don't see it. Could it be harmful to either humans or dog if they swim in it, ingest it?
My, like, all of the science that I've read and my experience with it is no, that you really need it in a more concentrated form to be harmful, which is like why it can be harmful through, like one little clam will filter tens of thousands of gallons of water in a day, which is kind of crazy to think about. And that's how come those toxins can get up into such high levels. But I've swum in it. I have plenty of friends that have swum in it, and dogs without incident. And I also haven't seen anything in the scientific literature, certainly not from around here, from North America. I mean, I might have seen some stuff about like tropical China, about it getting to such high levels, but I don't, it's not anything you have to worry around here, to get a little bit in your mouth by accident.
This next one's more of a comment than a question. It says, shine a blue diving light on the creatures about 455 nanometers. It will glow in the dark with fluorescence.
I'm trying to, can you repeat that? I actually really couldn't hear you.
Sure. Shine a blue, oh, I know why. Shine a blue diving light on the creature about 455 nanometers. It will glow in the dark with fluorescence.
There are many creatures that fluoresce under lights like that we can't see with our regular eyes. And so we've found, like, we're finding more and more and more and more evidence of this, because many animals can see greater parts of the light spectrum than we can, into the infrared and the ultraviolet. So for example, many seabirds have recently been found to fluoresce, and actually like corvids, like crows and jays. And in my other presentation, I have pictures of mantis shrimp, which really fluoresce. And actually eye shine when you're out at night and you are wearing a headlamp, and you get those like crazy green and red and orange glows of animals' eyes back at you. That's a type of biofluorescence. And I could go into why that happens, but maybe we should move on.
I'm not sure I understand this one. It says, would the currents past the bridge abutments cause luminescence?
Oh yeah. Can the motion of tide against obstacles, whether man-made or natural, cause the bioluminescence to go off? And yes, I've seen that many times. If the bioluminescence is strong enough and the current is strong enough and there's an obstruction, that will allow you to see the bioluminescence. And when you're out on the water, you know, with that restoration under the bridge on Marrowstone, I was able to see the difference in the amount of salmon in that harbor visually on my tours at night, you know, from 2020 to 2021, which is really cool. And now that I'm working at the fisheries lab, that I was able to find out that's totally confirmed by data as well, that the increase happened and happened rapidly. So it's cool to be able to see the animals like that.
Okay. I think that was the last question people asked. If you're going to post presentation on YouTube, this presentation has been recorded and it will be posted on Friends of Fort Flagler. If you go on the resource and look on the programs, you'll see bioluminescence presentation. You'll be able to run it again anytime you'd like.
Super. Could I get a copy of the comments before we close out if they disappear?
I will copy them. I'll do
Lovely.
my
I'd love
best.
to be able to see them.
Any other questions?
Oh, I'd just like to plug my website again, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
It's olympickayaktours.com. And I'm open to also kind of do last minute rush tickets for locals who maybe don't want to pay the full price, but I still want to fill a tour, and work with community groups as well. And even if you personally are not someone who you're like, hey, kayaking's not for me, or it's not for me anymore, you know, spreading the word is really great. And we also have gift certificates, and we also have rentals now of sit on top kayaks and stand up paddle boards that we rent out during daytime. So check us out.
Awesome. Copied all the comments. So I'll be able to send them to you by email. Again, everyone, thank you very much. If you haven't looked at our March programs, we have another program pretty much the next 3 weeks in a row on a variety of topics. So hopefully everyone will join us. Sam, again, thank you. The presentation was awesome, and it was great that we had this much time for Q&A because there were a lot of questions. Thank you so much. Have a great night. Good night, everyone.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.